Hi, this is Halli Casser-Jayne, and you are listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, available at HalliCasser-Jayne.com. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show is supported by the following.
Hallo nach Deutschland, hier ist Jürgen Klopp. Ich sage ja immer, wer oben mitspielen will, muss helle sein. Und wer ganz oben mitspielen will, tja, der muss um Klassen heller sein.
Um Klassen heller, der neue Opel Mokka X mit intelligenten LED-Scheinwerfern. Der neue Mokka X, schon für 139 € im Monat inklusive Opel Flat. Nur bis 28. Januar bei teilnehmenden Opel-Partnern.
Hallo nach Deutschland, hier ist Jürgen Klopp. Ich sage ja immer, wer oben mitspielen will, muss helle sein. Und wer ganz oben mitspielen will, tja, der muss um Klassen heller sein.
Um Klassen heller, der neue Opel Mokka X mit intelligenten LED-Scheinwerfern. Der neue Mokka X, schon für 139 € im Monat inklusive Opel Flat. Nur bis 28. Januar bei teilnehmenden Opel-Partnern.
Spiritual leader and activist Matthew Fox has been called many names, from renegade to radical. By some, he's deemed a heretic. By others, a warrior. To his devotees, he's a man of peace. Today on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, the former brother of the Dominican Order of the Roman Catholic Church for 34 years, before his denunciation by Cardinal Ratzinger, who later became Pope Benedict XVI, joins me at my table for an in-depth conversation, an hour I promise you won't soon forget. But before we begin, the Halli Casser-Jayne Show is always available online at HalliCasser-Jayne.com. Born Timothy James Fox, internationally acclaimed spiritual theologian and activist Matthew Fox was a brother of the Dominican Order of the Roman Catholic Church for 34 years before his expulsion for his radical views. Fox became a member of the Episcopal Church in 1993. He has written 33 books that have been translated into over 40 languages. Among them are Original Blessing, The Coming of the Cosmic Christ, and his astonishing biography, Confessions, The Making of a Post-Denominational Priest. Fox earned a master's degree in philosophy and another in theology, and holds a doctorate in the history and theology of spirituality from the Institut Catholic de Paris. His time in Paris politicized him, and he became a champion for the rights of the poor, women, people of color, gays, and lesbians. He is the founder of the University of Creation Spirituality in California, where he conducts dozens of workshops each year, and is a visiting scholar at the Academy for the Love of Learning. He's a recipient of the Abbey Courage of Conscience Peace Award, other recipients being the Dali Lama, Mother Teresa, and Rosa Parks. From altar boy to Catholic priest to prophetic warrior, Matthew Fox is a spiritual force to be reckoned with. Let's talk. Reverend Matthew Fox. We'll start with Reverend, and then now that you and I are going to be great and fabulous friends, we'll go from there. What a delight, really, to have you here. And let's get right to it. You've had some life, as we're about to explore, and during your now, what, you were 76, may I say, yesterday?
Yes, you're right.
How do you like that?
Mm-hmm.
Happy birthday. You've been called a lot of things over the 76 years, and I want to discuss some of them, from renegade to radical to heretic to warrior to troublemaker. Here's what I'm wondering. What do you call yourself?
Matt Fox, citizen of the world, trying to keep some integrity in the midst of all the shadows that come upon us and from within ourselves in the cultural shadows, and trying to speak up like the Jewish prophets tell us to do, to shout and take your clothes off and run around the city if you have to get attention. So, disturber of the peace.
A disturber of the peace. I think that's beautiful. I like the way that sounds. So let's go back to Matt's beginnings, and let's go back to your early years for just a bit, because they certainly helped form who you became. Share with us just a little bit of your childhood, your upbringing, how you came to your love of God.
Well, I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. I was in the middle of 7 children, number 4. They say the middle is the most neurotic. and 3 brothers, 3 sisters, and 2 strong parents, and very interesting people. My father was actually a football coach at the University of Wisconsin for much of my childhood, and then he became a businessman. My mother was, a stay-at-home mom with 7 children in 10 or 11 years. What are you going to do?
Exactly.
But she was very wise. Every day she went out for 2 hours for her own soul to hang out with adults or play tennis or book clubs or something like that. She kept her soul alive. To her, being a mother was only a part-time job, even though there were 7 of us. That's my conclusion.
Wow.
So she read voraciously. She was part Jewish. Her mother was Jewish, though she had converted to Episcopalianism. But that passion, I think, for justice and for life itself was very strong in my mother. And she was a very creative mother. And the 7 of us have been involved in creative work and callings, I think, over the years. So Madison, of course, is a political town, being the state capital, and a university town, but also has beautiful lakes and 4 seasons were very strong before global warming really hit. So I was very close to nature, and I loved it. And of course, the Native American spirit is very alive in Wisconsin. And I had Native American genes from the time I was very young, so I know that had a big impact on me, especially as I grew older. And then we belonged to a Dominican parish. I went to public high school, and I had great debates with my friends who were either Jewish, agnostic, or Protestant. And I'd go to my parish priest, and he would give me Aquinas to read or Chesterton or something. So there was an intellectual side to my faith searching from an early time, and I really liked that. And so I was drawn to the Dominicans because they have that tradition, and I thought I'd give it a shot after high school.
You weren't raised a Catholic, or you were raised a Catholic? You were.
No, we were raised Catholic.
Okay, I wanted to clarify that. I thought that you were.
No.
I think the other thing that impacted your life was you had polio, right?
Yes, that's true. When I was 12 or 13, I got polio, and they couldn't tell me if I'd ever walk again. And a friend of mine had died of it the year before. So I remember when I did get my legs back, I don't know, I was in the hospital at least 6 months, I think. I was overjoyed. And I remember saying to the universe, I'll never take my legs for granted again. And in retrospect, I think that's very mystical insight. You know, when you think about meditation and breathing and paying attention to the breath, well, you know, it's so easy to take breath for granted until your last one. Or, and you know, how sacred breath is, how sacred the first breath of a newborn baby is. So I think that whole experience of letting go and not knowing if I'd walk again was very powerful for me. And in many ways, I left my father because, as I said, he was a football coach. My older brothers were all state football, and I just presumed this is what I was going to be doing. And lo and behold, I couldn't walk for a while. I got my legs back. I did play sports, but with more detachment, I think, than my father and older brothers. But I learned something in the process. And I met when I was in the hospital, there was a very contemplative Dominican brother who would visit me regularly. He ended up in the Trappist monastery. So that had an influence on me, too, that I discovered another way to be a man besides football was contemplation. So even though I love sports and still do to this day, that contemplative side came home to me, I think, at that time of letting go.
I'm always in awe of people who enter the priesthood or become nuns or make that commitment on complete and utter faith to a God that there is, for secular folks like me, you know, a question as to the existence, if you will, for so many. That just bowls me away. But you are such a man of faith, and I wonder, is that something that came in an enlightenment moment, something that you arrived at? What?
Well, I had a lot of experiences when I was young. I can call them mystical experiences now, of varied kinds. In nature, in liturgy, especially the Saturday Mass in the Catholic Church back then was always dedicated to Mary. So you had these great passages from the wisdom literature of Hebrew Bible, like Proverbs. I was, you know, playing with God before the creation of the world, delighting to be with the sons of daughters of the human race, that kind of thing. Or Sirach, I was walking on the vaults of the sky and on the shores of the deep. This really moved me as a teenager. And of course, now I realize, hey, this is the feminist literature in the Bible. It's the goddess talking here. And thanks to the Catholic Church for keeping it alive, even though they didn't know what they were doing, but they did something profound. And so there was, because the Catholic Church is so old, that it's pre-modern. And that means that there's space there for the feminine, the divine feminine, even if it's been put up on on a pedestal in terms of Mary or something. The deeper meaning is that there is a connection to the divine feminine. Of course, I found that again later with the Native American tradition, with Mother Earth and so forth. But also, when I was a junior in high school, I read Tolstoy's War and Peace, and that blew my soul wide open. That's what I told a friend of mine. It blew my soul wide open, and I wanted to know what happened to me. And that's really what got me interested in exploring the Dominican tradition, was to explore mystical experience. Those are the words I can use today. At that time, all I said was it blew my soul wide open. I want to know what happened to me. So I had lots of mystical experiences, say, in nature, in reading, in music. I remember when I was a freshman in high school, walking in the living room, someone was playing Beethoven's Seventh, and all I wanted to do was dance. It just utterly stole my soul. So what was that about, Shakespeare, all the things that go on in adolescence, I was in a place to kind of appreciate them. And I think it began in many ways with the experience of polio, that I let go of something, and I was on a search, I think, for some deeper meaning to life and exploring these deeper experiences.
So here's the thing. Dominican Order, I was looking that up because I'm not all that familiar with it. Uh-huh. And it was founded to preach the gospel and to oppose heresy? Was that the... Which is ironic, buddy.
The part I was interested in was preaching the gospel. All these orders have their shadow side, as everything human does. So there have been some very good Dominicans in history, like Meister Eckhart and Aquinas, and in my day, Chanou, who was my mentor in Paris, and so forth. But then there have been some dark sides too. Torquemada, the head inquisitor in the Spanish Inquisition, was, I'm sorry to say, a Dominican. So, you have to keep your wits about you and not sell your conscience in these things. But I was drawn by the intellectual side, because I was from a university town, and a lot of friends of my parents were university people, professors and stuff. So that side meant a lot to me, and they had this tradition, but also the mystical side. And that was there. The contemplative side was there, at least in potency and in potential, and that too drew me. An experience of community. Here I'd lived my life in a family of 9. That's kind of a community experience. So I felt I wouldn't have trouble with multiple personalities around me.
Right. It was a perfect fit, if you will.
It seemed like a perfect fit, and it was my home parish. So, I'd seen these people in action for years, and I'd, been an altar boy and all the rest, and there was no abuse that I knew of now or before, although there were some priests who were not well off. One fellow drank himself to death at 42, I remember. These are stories I learned later. Another was a drug addict.
So the big change. So here we are. It didn't happen overnight. I'm sure it wasn't a aha moment, but you started to see things differently than the church, and express those differences. And I'm curious as to what precipitated that. Can you give me an answer to that? Do you know?
Yeah. Oh, sure. The Second Vatican Council was launched by Pope John the 23rd, and he was a pope I could really groove with. I made my vows when he was pope, and that meant a lot. I loved his vision of reaching out to other traditions, and including the Jewish tradition, and he reached out to Marxists and all the rest. I loved that. And he inspired them, the Second Vatican Council, and they did some good work. And that's when I was coming of age in the 60s. But after the council, you had Pope Paul VI, who really booted it when he wrote Humani Generis, encyclical for bad birth control, and that really put thinking people in the church in an uproar. And then you had Pope John Paul I, who seemed like a really good improvement until he died after just a month and was most likely assassinated. And then you had John Paul II. And he had 34 years with John Paul II and then Pope Benedict XVI, who was this hatchet man who ran the Inquisition. Of the Inquisition, frankly. They brought the Inquisition back, and they tried to turn back the tide of social justice and preferential option for the poor and liberation theology and all these things that came out of the Second Vatican Council. So I refused to sit down and shut up about that. I felt it was my responsibility as a theologian then to speak out but I was writing, and a lot of people were responding to my writings, and I really was not taking on the church as such. To me, that was a project that didn't interest me. I was much more interested in people's spiritual lives. But I got in trouble, especially when I wrote my book, Original Blessing. That got attention in Rome. They're very committed to original sin, I learned the hard way.
Right.
But I tried to undo that. And, of course, that really is a big undoing. I realized that how firmly committed this enterprise has been since the 4th century, when the term was invented in the 4th century. Jesus never heard of original sin. No Jew has. But in the 4th century, Augustine came up with the idea, and that was the same time when the church inherited the empire. So to run an empire, original sin is a pretty good idea. It gets people in line.
Let's be
so I was trying to deconstruct that, and that was pretty threatening.
Right. And I want to explain to listeners what that means. Give us what the Christian church or the Catholic Church teaches versus what you believe, because one to me is very negative, which you and I talked off air, is something I am so in agreement with you about, you coming to a very positive, far more godly picture of things. Do it as tightly as you can, because I'm watching that clock. I got a lot of questions.
Okay. Well, the word blessing in theology is a word for goodness. And it's about our origins as being a place of goodness, not a place of sin. This original sin talk is so disturbing because it means you come into the world as a blotch on existence, and the rest of your life you're begging to legitimize your existence. And frankly, I think the secular world has picked up on original sin. I think consumer capitalism is carrying through the same ideology. And that is that you don't have what it takes. You have to buy some external redemption. See, you have to get by buying this thing or that thing or this Botox or something else. You see, I think that consumer capitalism is a secular version of original sin. And that's why it's still around. But original blessing is that, hey, this universe of 13.8 billion years that has birthed us in this amazing planet and all its wonderful creatures, it's a blessing. It's good. It's beautiful. And not only that, now we know the universe is 2 trillion galaxies big. I mean, if this doesn't blow your mind, what will? And this is recent information from science of just the last 2 months or so. So we're filled with awe and wonder at existence, and that's the beginning, as Rabbi Heschel says. Awe is the beginning of wisdom. That's the first stage of a mystical experience. And when I talk about experiencing mysticism in nature or in literature or music, that's what it is. It's awe. It's that which blows your soul wide open. And that's original blessing.
All right. So let me go here with you. So in your coming to this understanding, which is so brilliant because I share it with you, but if you're coming to this understanding is so diametrically opposed to the Christian, and I know Catholic and Christian, I'm worried about putting those two things in the same sentence, but you as a Catholic priest at the time, but isn't that the basis of Christianity, that you're saying?
Well, you're right that all fundamentalists make this the basis of Christianity, why Christ came, if you will. But no, it's not. You see, like in my recent book on the Cosmic Christ, Stations of the Cosmic Christ, and I wrote a previous book of Cosmic Christ, 28 years ago. This is ancient teaching in Christianity. It comes from the wisdom literature of Israel that Christ is that which holds all things together in the heavens and on the earth, and that the Christ is not just about Jesus, it's about all of us. All beings are other Christs, because all beings are radiant with the divine presence and the image of God. And this is an ancient Jewish teaching, and it's in the earliest teachings in the Christian scriptures. It's in Paul, and it's in the Gospel according to Thomas. And they are about the same time. They wrote before the 4 Gospels. So this is, in fact, the origin. And this idea that we have to be saved from something called original sin, this came up in the 4th century by name. And so that's why, I don't know, that's why there's a struggle, I guess. I'm trying to shake up the Christian understanding of itself, its identity, by realizing that we are part of the goodness of creation. Yes, humans, obviously, we err and we're capable of great evil and so forth. And that, too, is part of the good news, that we're capable of doing something about that, of preferring justice to injustice and truth to lies and the rest. But also to see that we are placed in the context of a very beautiful and gratuitous existence that's taken 13.8 billion years to set the table for us. And we really are foolish if we don't put gratitude first and work out of that instead of out of strife or, of course, beating up on ourselves, which is where the sin ideology plays havoc psychologically and sociologically. I mean, you ask many people, their original sin, quote unquote, is being a person of color or being gay or being a woman in a patriarchal culture. So the ambiguity of this original sin ideology is very scary because all kinds of people can project into it, and then their own empowerment is diminished and their own beauty is not honored and respected.
Oh, my gosh. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And so you now are up against your church, and your church says, adios, amigo. We got to silence you. You're out of here. It's interesting to me who it was who ultimately led to your excommunication. The man who became, what, Pope 12, 14? I don't know, 16.
Benedict 16, yeah.
Right, and it was Mr. Ratzinger? Was
Ratzinger.
It? Right, which is ironic because look what happened to him at the end.
Yeah,
I'll say it, which is he is the only, in like how many years, he's the only pope to ever step down for hundreds. I think 15, 14 was the one before him who did that because of the way, for many reasons I suspect, but one was because of the way he handled the abuse issues in the Catholic Church. Oh my gosh. So here's where I want to go with you. There's a wonderful book I read when I was a kid by Harold Kushner, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. You're never going to tell me that what you went through wasn't, oh my gosh, right? Oh my God. Because the whole church comes down on you. Everything that you were is pulled. How old were you when you were excommunicated?
Well, I'd been in the Dominican Order 34 years, so I was about 54.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. And to have that just wrenched away for speaking your truth. I know I read that a lot of your brothers distanced themselves from you. Talk to me about that experience, because how you got through that, I think, is something that we could all learn from, because we all have bad things happen, and we're all good people.
Well, it's a question. That's what conscience is about, isn't it? You know, that it sometimes demands something of you, you know, and you have to choose between conscience and loyalty, if you will. And that's a moment in one's life. And, of course, it can happen more than once. But I was in very good company, and by that I meant that I studied a lot of history, and I knew that they had condemned Meister Eckhart, who was my favorite mystic, and he was a Dominican. And they condemned Thomas Aquinas 3 times before they canonized him a saint. So I know enough about history to know that condemnation is not the last word. You have to keep your integrity, your conscience, and your sense of humor if you're going to get through all this. And I had, of course, the support of many people in my lifetime. The Dutch Dominicans supported me very strongly. In fact, they invited me to join their province in Holland, but to continue my work in California. And I thanked them for that. And we tried to pull it off, but there was a rule that said to leave one province for another, you need the permission of your present province, and my provincial would not let me do that. He said, I don't want you in any province in the world. So that killed that idea. But it was wonderful to know that a whole province, and they knew me. I'd visited Holland on several occasions, and they actually read my work. And Father Skilevitz is a great Dutch Dominican. And for centuries, they've been protecting theologians. They know how to do it. The American Dominicans are much more naive about that and really don't know how to do it. I learned that the hard way. But technically, no, I was not excommunicated. I was expelled from the Dominican Order. Okay. That's what technically happened. Okay. But time I was working with young people from England about reinventing liturgy using rave and dance and art forms like rap and DJ and VJ. And I was very interested in that, in creating worship that was interesting and alive and using postmodern languages. So under that experience, I asked them, how can I help you guys? And they said, if we became an Episcopal priest, you could run interference because you get what we're doing and few theologians do. So I thought it over and said, well, the Pope fired me. He doesn't need me anymore. He told me. So I went to the Episcopal bishop in San Francisco and said, hey, I think you'd become an Episcopal priest just to do this one thing, to help young people reinvent worship. And he said, go for it. So that's how that came about. But it was a painful experience, was it not? Oh, yeah. Sure, it was painful. Yeah, but, life is full of painful things, isn't it? And again, conscience matters. What do we really believe in? I mean, it shakes you down. What do I really believe in? And I told the bishop, I said to him, these are important issues to me. The issue of women in the church, the issue of gay people, the issue of working with Native Americans, because these were the objections to my work by Ratzinger. And I worked too closely with Native Americans and all this, and I was a feminist theologian and all that. I didn't know that was a heresy. And then I said, these are matters of conscience. And the bishop said, conscience? He said, every time I hear that word, somebody's getting in trouble. And so that was kind of like a nice foot out the door, too. I said, well, I'm not sure I want to hang around with someone with the leadership here that is scared of the word conscience. Good heavens.
And I think something else comes to mind when you talk about that, because what it is like the church stuck, afraid of change, control, politics. All of that is so ingrained, not just in the Catholic Church, by the way, but I could have a whole conversation with you, and maybe we'll get to it, about organized religion in general right now. And so anybody who comes along and says, hey, there's a different way, there's another way, there are places we need to explore, we need to modernize, you were probably looking real scary to them. I'm sure that you were. I want to talk about the Bible quickly. And that Bible is used in so many ways.
I like that.
How'd you like that? Did I get out of that one? Did I handle that one right?
I like it.
Okay.
That Bible.
That Bible.
Hit people over the head with, yeah.
I mean, talk to me about your view. I assume you see a lot of it as allegorical. I'm sure there are clues to true history in it, and maybe not so true. We don't know. But is it misused?
Oh, my goodness, is it misused. There's a saying among the medievals, corruptio optimi est pessima. The corruption of the best is the worst. And, so to take a sacred text, whether it's our Bible or someone else's, the Quran or what have you, and beat people over the head with it, what could be worse? What could be worse? But I would say this about the Bible, and this is one of the things I love about Thomas Aquinas. He says, Revelation comes in 2 volumes, nature and the Bible. So nature is a Bible. And Eckhart says that too, the Dominican mystic who came right after Aquinas. He says that every creature is a word of God and a book about God. So creation itself is a Bible. And this is why we need scientists. And this is one of my most basic problems with fundamentalism is an anti-science attitude and this whole global warming stuff that they don't want to pay attention to. Although there's a break there now. The younger fundamentalists are getting more open to these realities. But that's the first point I make. What we call that Bible is only 3,000 years old or so, whereas the universe is 13.8 billion years old. So the Creator has been working through the universe and the revelation of nature for 13.8 billion years. So we shouldn't put all our eggs into this human document called that Bible. So that's the first point I want to make. I think we have to stretch the word Bible to realize first there are 2 Bibles. Nature itself is a Bible. It's a revelation. It's an unfolding of the presence of the divine. And people know this. Not only indigenous people know this, but if you ask people, that's what I do all the time. Where are your mystical experiences? 95% of them will point to sunsets or to experiences of birth or life or lovemaking or music or friendship. All of these experiences of creation and nature, these are revelations. Therefore, they are Bibles. Now, when you come to the book, the Bible, our modern scholarship has shown us a lot about how this project, this book, was put together over many centuries. Now I'm talking about the Hebrew Bible, and then of course the Christian Bible, the New Testament, was put together over many decades and by many people. And so obviously you're going to get angles on it that are different, that contradict each other, and that are not historical in the sense that we define historicity today, because back in those days, people didn't understand history the way we do today, or science, of course. So, of course, a lot of it is stories, but stories are very important. Stories and myths keep people together. And, of course, today we're getting a lot of our stories and myths from science, and that's helpful, too, because science encompasses the world, if you will. It's not tied down to one tradition of religion or culture and so forth. So it's like a bigger picture of things. But I believe in many Bibles. I love the Vedas, the Upanishads of India and Hinduism. I love the Tao Te Ching. I think it's one of the greatest books in the human lexicon. And, of course, I think the Quran has beautiful passages. And so, let's recognize that there are many sources of inspiration and revelation in the world. And, of course, the poets and musicians are included in that. So, that's what's so wonderful. We're sitting at a banquet. There's so many options here. But to take things literally, that's the danger with the Bible or any other text.
Right.
In fact, the Bible says, Paul says, the letter kills, spirit gives life. So he's contrasting literalism to spirit. That which gives life. That's the test of anything we read, isn't it?
You are listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. My guest today is spiritual leader and activist Matthew Fox, the author of Confessions, The Making of a Post-Denominational Priest. We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us.
Hallo nach Deutschland, hier ist Jürgen Klopp. Ich sage ja immer, wer oben mitspielen will, muss helle sein. Und wer ganz oben mitspielen will, tja, der muss Klassenheller sein.
Klassenheller, der neue Opel Mokka X mit intelligenten LED-Scheinwerfern. Der neue Mokka X, schon für 139 € im Monat inklusive Opel Flat. Nur bis 28. Januar bei teilnehmenden Opel-Partnern.
Hallo nach Deutschland, hier ist Jürgen Klopp. Ich sage ja immer, wer oben mitspielen will, muss helle sein. Und wer ganz oben mitspielen will, tja, der muss Klassenheller sein.
Klassenheller, der neue Opel Mokka X mit intelligenten LED-Scheinwerfern. Der neue Mokka X, schon für 139 € im Monat inklusive Opel Flat. Nur bis 28. Januar bei teilnehmenden Opel-Partnern.
And we are back, and you were listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. We're here today with internationally acclaimed theologian Matthew Fox. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let's go to two words, religion and spirituality. Let's make it three, mysticism. Let's bring them all in. So, has organized religion, and I use that term, in quotes because I don't want to insult anybody, but it's a way to frame Judaism, Catholicism, whatever. Have they forgotten about spiritualism and mysticism? And I don't know if I equate spirituality and mysticism with magic, but if we take the two out of the equation, aren't we missing too much? I mean, was that part of the argument that you had with the church, that it had forgotten, it was losing its way in terms of the mysticism, the spiritualism?
Yes, that it was too invested in external expressions of religion, whether it be buildings or the sociological dimension of leadership, popes and bishops and all that. Institutions, that the guts, the heart of religion is not institutions. It is gratitude. Now, Thomas Aquinas said that back in the 13th century in this pre-modern understanding. He said that the real meaning of religion is it falls under the virtue of gratitude. It's about saying thanks. And I think that's important. I think it's really important. If we lose our sense of gratitude, and of course, if we're piling up laws and rules and canon laws and saying this is religion, that is so superficial. It's so operating above ground, whereas our souls are deep. Meister Eckhart says that the ground of the soul is dark, and he says the human soul is as unknowable as God is. That's how deep we are. Well, that's what interests me, the adventure of discovering what it is to be a human being, what it is to be in relationships, not only with other people, but with the earth and the rivers and the climate and all the rest, and future generations and the ancestors. I mean, that area of depth is what real religion should be about. And this happens periodically when you look at history, that religion kind of runs out of energy at times. Like it happened in the Middle Ages, and that's when Francis of Assisi came along, because the monks had been so successful for centuries and so tied to the feudal system, and then the feudal system started breaking apart, and the monks weren't doing their job. They were getting fat and lazy. So Francis comes along and invents something new, a new version of Christianity, which honors the poor in poverty. Now, the Second Vatican Council tried to do the same thing, I think, with this preferential option for the poor. And this inspired Latin America and the people there who had lived for so long under oppression of the dictators and so forth. And that really caught fire. But then the CIA linked up with Pope John Paul II. I document all of that in my book, The Pope's War. And the two of them went firstly after liberation theology in South America. This was under Reagan. There was a conscious effort to split the church, and they succeeded. And they did it by the head of CIA, who was a very right-wing Catholic, Jim Casey, made 29 trips personally to the Vatican with satchels full of cash to give to the Pope, to give to Solidarity. In exchange, the Pope went after Latin American liberation theology. And thousands were killed of good people, many lay people and many priests and some bishops too, and sisters, because they were standing up for the poor and the oppressed. And that's what makes Pope Francis interesting.
So can I inject?
He comes out of that moment in history.
I'm going to inject myself. So I have, it's a conversation I wanted to bring up to you. I was a reporter in Salvador and Nicaragua.
Ooh.
And Honduras and whatever.
During the wars there?
Yes, sir. Wow. Got very involved with that, wrote a book. I share your views. Yeah. That was my introduction to liberation theology. And I got to tell you, one of my things was, and one of the things that I wrote it as a novel, was that the church so oppressed the people. One of the things that was so upsetting to me in those days is I would ask people, whoa, and that God's going to take care of me, the church is going to take care of me, so that the responsibility for self, the will to fight, the will to stand up for ourselves was completely annihilated under the manipulation, if you will. And I'm going to say that in Latin America. I can't speak for all the world, but in Latin America, in particularly in Salvador, of the church. And it was appalling to see what happened there in Guatemala.
Were you there when Oscar Romero was murdered?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I off air, I will tell you, because we don't have the time. I have a long stories I could tell you. Yeah, absolutely. Bishop Fry, Bishop Fry is a good friend of mine. And I worked with him. One of my good friends was one of the people who was kidnapped in those crazy days going back. So, so I was a part of all of that. And that was another reason I wanted to talk to you, because I knew that was something that was near to your heart. But again, it gets back to, if we're talking religion today and that aspect of it, that's very scary, that power and that manipulation.
That's right. That's it. Religion casts a very large shadow, and yet it has this potential too to inspire people to be generous. And the base communities in South America did so much to create courage. And like one of my students, Sister Dorothy Stang, was assassinated 11 years ago in the Amazon from Ohio. And why? Because she was defending the rainforest, working with the peasants, defending them against the great plantation owners who were, of course, trying to rip off the peasants and so forth and destroy the forest to make quick money. So she was gunned down and murdered. She was martyred, literally. Right. And she knew that she might be so. If she went back there, she'd been there 42 years, and she was a leader, so she was visible. But thousands of people were martyred like she was. And these people, I honor them. And the
three nuns
inspired by basic principles of justice, I think, and generosity. A lot of them got it from the Psychovac Council and from liberation theology. So again, religion is not always bad.
No.
It can be.
Right.
And so it's a dangerous thing. Corruptio optimi est basima. The corruption of the best is the worst. And so when you have corrupt religion or religion going to bed with fascist political powers, whether they be in North America or South America, you're in a very dangerous situation. And that is happening in our lifetime.
And happening here right now. One other thing I wanted to go on mysticism and spiritualism with you, which is, when did it get a bad rap? Because there was so much of history where it was not. And then
right. That's right. It was the modern era, because the modern era, the Enlightenment, was all about the left brain. It was all about knowledge, which is a wonderful thing. But it really banished. And Theodore Rosak, the eco-psychologist, says that the Enlightenment held mysticism up for ridicule as a worst offense against science and reason. So science and reason became very left-brain for centuries, really. And this, frankly, is what I think has rendered education as boring as it is, and has put creativity on the back burner in favor of exams and other things. So, I think education is one of the real problems in our time as well. And that's been a lot of my work, has been to reinvent forms of education that are more inclusive of right and left brain. Because our right brains are our intuitive brains, our creative brains, our mystical brains. Einstein said that the intuitive brain is a sacred gift, and that rationality is a gift, but it should serve the intuitive brain, because values, he said, do not come from the intellect. They come from intuition, from the right brain, from mysticism. They're about what we really love and cherish and how to get there. So I love to quote Einstein about this, because you can't accuse him of being anti-intellectual. But he was a broad enough thinker to realize that we've got to have a balance between what I call the mystical, what he called the intuitive, and the intellectual, the rational. We need both to be pumping at full steam, I think, to have an alive educational project and to bring alive the wisdom in the young people. But in our system today, we're squelching that intuition still. And mysticism, even the churches don't know what mysticism means or how to teach it, though I've been doing it for 40 years now. There are ways to teach it that are very fun, actually. But you balance it with an intellectual life as well. You don't allow mysticism to run free without the intellect and rationality. You need both of these working together. We seem to lurch from one to the other. We have to find this middle ground.
Yeah, we don't do gray very well in our society anymore. I mean, I don't know what that's about, but we don't. And, if anybody who listens to my show regularly knows that I rail against the education system now. What is the first thing that's cut out on budget cuts and everything else? It's the arts, which is just so nuts. It's ridiculous how crazy it is. And we have no imagination in this country at all either. I know, and that just drives me insane. A lot of the unhappiness, I think, that we have in the world is that we don't have the use of that imagination, because it's not fostered anymore the way that it used to be, so that people don't have the outlet they might have had. Or, if you will, you can take it one step further and say the truth about that is also about spiritualism. Once you cut those two things out of there, it becomes a very cold, hard world to live in, I think.
I tell the story about, I was once in New Hampshire doing a lecture. They drove me in. They said the fundamentalists just took over the school board in this county, and their first decree was, henceforth, no teacher in a public school in this county can use the word imagination in the classroom. And I said, what? I said, what's that about? Well, they said, Satan is in the imagination. And I said, well, so are angels and God, and everything's in the imagination. That's what's so wonderful about the imagination. Everything's there plus one more thing that no one's ever thought of before. But can you imagine? So that's the agenda of the fundamentalists and right-wing educational ideology in our culture, to eliminate imagination. So you've just named it. You're seeing the results. We're seeing the results of that. And a lot of it is souls that are very tired and sick and need drugs to get high, or addictions of some kind to get excited about living. And what you're saying is 100% correct.
Yeah, I thought a lot about it, because I've always had a very active imagination, and it was fostered. I was lucky I had that. And I see the kids today, they just don't. And you look at their faces, right? And their faces are these pallid colors. There's no joy. There's no light behind anybody's eyes anymore. It makes me absolutely insane. And we're going to go from imagination. Let's go yin yang. Let's go to suffering.
Well, you've just been talking about it.
I have, haven't I?
Suffering, the pallid faces of these people, young people who are spending all their time staring at a screen and learning what someone else is telling them instead of what's going on inside their rich souls, inside their rich imaginations. That's suffering right there, isn't it?
It surely is. I mean, there is no joy in Mudville these days, and I want to make I found a quote of yours that I loved. If you look closely at a tree, you'll notice its knots and dead branches, just like our bodies. What we learn is that beauty and imperfection go together wonderfully. Is that suffering and joy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that sometimes we make up our own suffering. Otto Rank is my favorite psychologist. And by the way, he being Jewish, doesn't talk about original sin, but he talks about the original wound. And he thinks we're all born with this wound of separation when we leave our mother's womb, and that is the bell that's rung time and again in our lives when we go through crises, this crisis of separation. But he also says that all neurosis is the artiste manqué. It's a failed artist in all of us. And so we create a lot of our own suffering because we take bad stories we received when we were growing up, and then we create a drama out of them, and we're beating up on ourselves. And that's why he says that the solution to neurosis and a lot of this suffering is to find a creative path in life and a way to put out our stories, and both the bright side of them and the dark side of them, and he says the unio mystica. He actually uses that phrase. The mystical union is the key to solving this dilemma of our original wound, and that we learn the mystical union either through love or through art. That's what he teaches. I think it's just brilliant.
It is brilliant, and we need it to understand that. So that, I'm going to say the term again, organized religion, in a way, is the great separator these days. And I would assume you, in some ways, maybe, I'm pretty straightforward. I think you're more poetic than I. But I think that's a fair thing to say in terms of how it's being used today. And the other word that I wanted to bring up, because you were talking about Salvador and places like that and what's happened, but control is something that's a little odd in our society today, and it's out of control. Yeah. Control is out of control.
Yeah, I think that patriarchy's main agenda is control. To control creativity, to control imagination, control the feminine. This is at the basis of all fundamentalism, I think. And that's why all fundamentalism, I often say that you check out the Taliban, the Vatican, or Pat Robinson, what they have in common is their desire to control women, the inability to deal with women, and the archetype of creativity and birthing. So I think this happened when a patriarchy took over about 4,000 years ago. The control became the big thing, and of course war. So patriarchy, control, war, all that has become very embedded, I think, into our systems of not only religion but education and politics and even the media. So I think that this word control is an important one. We have to wake up to it, and it begins at home with oneself. How free are we to really explore, and how free is a younger generation to explore its imagination, as you said previously, and its capacity for play. Mysticism is about play. It's about, like Proverbs 8 says, playing with God before the creation of the world. It's about radical play. Living without a why is how the Buddhists put it, and Meister Eckhart puts it that way too, and he comes from the West. That everything is not about a purpose; it's about a process, and the way is to be playful, and it's not just about getting to a goal. Life isn't about getting someplace so much as it is about seeing the beauty along the way and trying to contribute to it, and living justly, and so others can enjoy a sense of play in the presence of the beauty and the goodness of the world. Yeah,
I love that sandbox of the world, huh? If we'd only get into it and get a little dirty playing in it. Two more words: empathy and compassion.
Well, I think that it's significant when the Dalai Lama says we can do away with all religion, but we can't do away with compassion. Compassion is my religion, he says. Well, Jesus said the same thing in Luke 6. He says, be you compassionate as created in heaven is compassionate. So he gets that from his Jewish tradition. In the Jewish tradition, compassion is the secret name for God. Now, in the Quran, by far the most common use of the adjective applied to Allah is Allah, the compassionate one. So what you find when you look at world religions is that they're all trying to teach compassion. And I think that has to do with the mammal brain. We've got these three brains. And the reptilian brain is running things today. Just look around, and all these military budgets and all these wars and everything else. And patriarchy itself, I think there's a connection between testosterone and the reptilian brain that someone should research more. But we've got to kind of calm the reptilian brain, and so that the mammal brain, which is the compassionate brain, because mammals have this family life and this kinship. Of course, they also make wars, but they have this capacity for compassion. This is why the word compassion in Hebrew and Arabic comes from the word for womb. The womb people, the mammals, are capable of great compassion. So I think compassion is at the heart of the resurrection of our species, if you will, and survival of our species. If we can't develop the mammal brain, if we continue to go down the path of the reptilian brain, which is winner take all, then we're doomed. And we're still on that path, clearly, especially with this rise of fascism in Europe and America today. Fear and the whipping up of fear, that appeals to the reptilian brain, because the reptilian brain is about action and react. It's not about subtlety, and it's certainly not about empathy and compassion.
Which are more the feminine, I guess. Has society gone to hell in a handbasket, or... Well,
I think we have to be careful of being overly dramatic about it. We're certainly going through a struggle, no question about it. But I think there's that line from David Orr, the eco-philosopher, that I like. He says, hope is a verb with the sleeves rolled up. I think we have work to do. We have inner work to do, like we were just talking about. The mammal brain has to come to the fore. We have to find ways to tame the reptilian brain. Of course, meditation is such a way, because meditation puts you in a state of solitude, and that's what reptiles love. They love to be alone in the sun. They're not real good at bonding. They're not good at compassion. They often eat their young, and like we're doing, we're eating our young if we're destroying the nature and ecology and the climate change and everything else. We're eating our young. Call it what it is. So we have this inner work to do, which has to then be projected into our institutions, including education and religion and economics and politics and media. All of it needs reinventing. So we talk about organized religion being in trouble, and it is today, but organized politics is in trouble. Organized economics is in trouble. And it's all disintegrating. It's not organized. That's what's clear. I mean, the crash of 8 years ago financially, it taught me how dumb our so-called economic bishops are, or priests, or popes, or whatever you call these people in Wall Street who think they know everything about economics. It's unbelievable how ignorant they were of what was going on, and then we all were surprised, of course. So, everything's falling apart, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. It's a challenge. It's a time to wake up. We have to get the young people, especially, out of their addicted state, to come alive and be on fire. And we need elders who get off the golf course and start connecting with young people. And we need this intergenerational wisdom today. We should retire the word retirement, replace it with the word refirement. We have to fire up the belly of the older people and the elders. We even have to have rites of passage for elders so they realize their responsibility to give back to the younger generation and to work with them, because no generation has all the answers, and we're not going to survive without the wisdom from the young and the old matching up and working together.
Yeah, we need a society that doesn't want to put the old out to pasture either. I think there's that side of it as well. And have respect. I remember when I was growing up, the older you were, the more respect that you had, and we wanted to be like you. And now it's the other way around, and I don't see what. I don't think I emulate any of these pasty-looking creatures with no creativity. They're sitting there getting high all the time. So listen to me. I want to clean up a couple of things before we finish, and one of them is I do want to go back to we haven't done it fully. You have brought it up a lot during our conversation. That is the environment, and I know science is a great part of everything that you believe in, and you can't put science and religion in the same conversation. Yes, you can, and you do it beautifully. Let's talk about that very real issue of protecting Mother Earth.
Well, one thing is that this binds us. I wrote in my book on Cosmic Christ 28 years ago, there's no such thing as a Roman Catholic rainforest and a Buddhist ocean and a Lutheran sun and a Baptist moon, So once all of our religions get reset in the context of creation, the sacredness of creation, we will have a much more peaceful earth. And each will find some humility. And, of course, humility comes from the word for humus, meaning earth. So the earth context and the struggle the earth is in is such a moment for uniting our species instead of carrying out our ridiculous ideological wars and petty religious proselytizing that's gone on far too long. So that alone is part and one of the gifts of the environmental movement. And, of course, it's one reason there's resistance to it, too. Every breakthrough has resistance. So that's a big part of the environment and our learning to listen to science again. Thomas Aquinas, 13th century, one of his biggest thing was bringing Aristotle into, the faith world. And he was condemned for it. Who needs science, especially Aristotle? He's a pagan, and furthermore, he came through Islam. But Aquinas said a mistake about creation is also a mistake about God. In other words, if you want to learn about divinity, you do go to those who study nature, and that's who scientists are. And that's why he said, as I quoted earlier, that the nature itself is a Bible, it's a revelation. But for that, you got to go to science. And a good example of that today is, of course, the issue of homosexuality. Science has spoken on this. It's the Galileo case of our time, that 9% or so of any given human population is going to be gay and lesbian, or going to be gay and lesbian. So get over it. In 464 other species, we've counted gay and lesbian populations. So it's natural. It's a minority, but it's natural. So get over it, And if religion would take some of the energy it puts into homophobia and put it toward defending the environment, the world would be a much saner place. But, you can't say that you love your children and grandchildren if you're leaving them bad water, bad air, bad soil, a bad forest, and are out killing all these marvelous species, the tigers, the elephants, the whales, the polar bears, that are disappearing before our very eyes. I mean, it's so tragic, you can hardly put it into words. All these beings are far older than our species. Whales have been here 50 million years longer than we have. And here we are sitting on our high horses, not even thinking about them when we make decisions about polluting the air and polluting the oceans and shooting them and of course, driving them off their ranges because we want to build our houses and refusing to support birth control and all the rest. All this is killing the planet in its beauty and diversity, and it's a scandal. It's as mortal a sin, as deadly a sin as anyone could make. Now, I give Pope Francis credit. His Laudato Si, his encyclical on the environment, is very well done. And I want to add, I have to say this in all humility, 80% of it was written by one of my students. Wow. A priest from working in the Philippines, an Irish priest. He went through my program, and then he went back and wrote short books on ecology and spirituality. Obviously, the Pope read them. He called them to Rome to write his encyclical form. But that encyclical is a very good document. It's strong, and it attacks capitalism and the other sources that are driving this ecocide. That's what I call it. This ecocide that our species is engaged in. And it's not this scandal. Then in the entire presidential debate, all those debates that they had, not one media person asked one question about the environment. If that's not a scandal, if that's not the ultimate in narcissism, what the Pope has rightly called narcissism, the anthropocentrism of our species, I don't know what is. Because without healthy food and water, nothing matters. Business is going to collapse, and everything else is going to collapse. Our bodies are going to collapse.
I hear you. So finally, you must be exhausted. I am taking
no, I'm
you.
Not. I hope I'm not talking too much.
No, are you kidding me? This is my Hanukkah Christmas gift. Having this hour with you. Nice. There you go. So, but let me go here. Having just celebrated 76 years young, looking back from that perch of yours, from the tree of your life, what would you leave us with within the scope of this conversation?
Well, I go back to gratitude. I think that if we can learn to be grateful for every breath and everything that flows from that, we will be changed people, and we will have woken up to a sense of the sacred. I had a dream years ago, and it said to me, there's nothing wrong with human species today except one thing. You've forgotten the sense of the sacred. And I think what happened in the Dakota events these last months of people protesting the attack on water, to realize how sacred water is. Buck Gostorz is a Lakota teacher who worked with me for years, and he said to me one day, you want to know how sacred water is? Go without it for 3 days. It's that simple. Go without it for 3 days. So notice, this was a political movement that temporarily has won its battle against those forces that want to put money, the god of money, ahead of the god of sacred water. And so I think there's an archetypal moment here when we're all being called to recover a sense of the sacred out of gratitude for being here. and we must organize, and we must stand up, and we must be counted, and we must take risks, and in order to defend the beauty, the sacredness of this earth of ours, and all that goes with it. And I think that's the agenda: political, spiritual, religious, educational, moral. This is a human agenda for the next generations, and the young and the old, we have to work together on this. Meister Eckhart says, if the only prayer you say in your whole life is thank you, that would suffice. That's how important gratitude is. I love that.
Well, here you go. I'm saying thank you. I've been speaking with Dr. Matthew Fox. To learn more about Mr. Fox, read Confessions, The Making of a Post-Denominational Priest, or any of his many books, which have sold more than 1.5 million copies and have been translated into 56 languages. And visit MatthewFox.org.
Hallo nach Deutschland, hier ist Jürgen Klopp. Ich sage ja immer, wer oben mitspielen will, muss helle sein. Und wer ganz oben mitspielen will, tja, der muss Klassenheller sein.
Klassenheller, der neue Opel Mokka X mit intelligenten LED-Scheinwerfern. Der neue Mokka X schon für 139 € im Monat inklusive Opel Flat. Nur bis 28. Januar bei teilnehmenden Opel-Partnern.
Hallo nach Deutschland, hier ist Jürgen Klopp. Ich sage ja immer, wer oben mitspielen will, muss helle sein. Und wer ganz oben mitspielen will, tja, der muss Klassenheller sein.
Klassenheller, der neue Opel Mokka X mit intelligenten LED-Scheinwerfern. Der neue Mokka X schon für 139 € im Monat inklusive Opel Flat. Nur bis 28. Januar bei teilnehmenden Opel-Partnern.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of RESEC LLC. Associate producer, Suzanne Probst. Music by Tony Rosales Jazz. Visit HalliCasserJayne.com.